Hi everyone, welcome to Stats Rescue 911. My name is Lynn, and in today's tutorial we're going to talk about two-way mixed ANOVA with a significant interaction effect and how you would go about analyzing that interaction effect further in order to determine which means are different from which. Now this is part B of a two-part series. In part 1, part A, we looked at a two-way mixed ANOVA and talked about when it's used and some of the need to knows there. We looked at the difference between a main effect and the interaction effect, and so it's highly recommended that you watch that video before watching this one. Even with that said, there are a few need to knows for this video. This is an advanced analysis, relatively advanced analysis, so I'm going to assume that if you're watching it, you've already been introduced to these topics, but just to be sure, you would really want to know the difference between a between versus a within subjects factor, main effects versus interaction effects, marginal means versus cell means, the difference between an independent and a dependent t-test, the difference between a one-way independent and repeated ANOVA, and post hoc tests. I know that's a long list, but again, I'm going to assume if you're doing this analysis, you've already had some sort of course in statistics, and if you need to refresh, then check and see if I've got a video up for these topics. If I don't have one up now, it will be up soon. All right, so let's get started. I'm just going to build the context here a little bit and talk about a study that my students and I conducted. And we did a study whereby we looked at a number of variables that could affect optimism for the future. And two of those variables are represented here. So we looked at religiosity. We asked people whether they were religious and practicing frequently, religious and practicing infrequently, religious and not practicing, or not religious at all. Right? And this is a between subjects factor because people who took the survey would either fall under this category here, this one, this one, this one. All right, so you can't be in more than one category at any given time, so this was our between subjects factor. All right, the next factor that we looked at was concern category, and here we asked people what they, how optimistic they were for their work or career 5 years down the road, their relationships in the future, and that was friends and family, the United States, the global world, and the planet itself. All right, and so these are 5 levels of concern category. And because every participant was asked these questions, so every participant contributed a score to the work question, the relations question, USA, global world, and planet, that makes this factor within subjects. And you can see that here because if we look at the participants, Tom, Dick, and Harry, Larry, Moe, and Curly, Peter, Paul, and Mary, Karen, Lynn, and Doug, all these participants contributed scores to the work category, and the same group of participants contributed scores to the relationship category, etc. All right, so this is why it's a mixed ANOVA. We have one between subjects variable or factor where each participant was tested under only one condition. All right, they were categorized into just one condition. That is between subjects, and then we just learned why this was considered within subjects. Okay, now we talked again last time in part A of this video series about main effects and interaction effects, and one thing we learned is that if you have an interaction effect, well, first of all, it means that the ANOVA, if you run the ANOVA, it's going to be analyzing cell means. And I didn't put cell mean in every box here, but I could have. All right, and a cell mean just represents a combination of treatments. So if you're in this cell, that means that you are in the work category as well as practicing religion frequently. So the mean here would be work and the combination religious practicing frequently. All right. If you were here, then this would be the mean for United States, but you'd still be in the religious practicing frequently category, but now it would just be combined with the United States. All right. And so each of these cell means represents a combination of treatments. Now, when you get a significant interaction effect, what that means is that either the effect of religiosity had on optimism, the effect of religiosity on optimism had an effect that depended on which category of concern you looked at. All right, so in other words, religiosity, the difference between these different groups here, might have been one way for the work category, so we might have seen one particular pattern of effects for work, and then a different pattern somewhere else. So maybe the pattern switched here at the relationship category. All right, so that's one way to look at it. You could say that the effect of religiosity on optimism depended on which concern category you looked at. But you could reverse that, and you could say the effect of concern category on optimism depends on whether you look at these individuals, these here, so religious practicing infrequently, etc. All right. So just in general terms, we can say either the effect of variable A depends on variable B, or you can say the effect of variable B depends on variable A. All right. Now, I'm going to show you how you would go about analyzing each possibility. And principally, what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to tell whether or not the pattern here, so if you look within this one column, does the pattern here change when you look over at this particular column? Right? Or does the pattern stay the same? Same thing. We want to look at this pattern now. All right, look at this pattern of means and see if it changes from the previous two columns. And then the same thing here. All right. Now, I'm going to show you a graph where we're doing all this. But if we did look at that, if we looked at, for example, whether or not the pattern of these means is the same as the pattern of these means, all right, that's going to be one particular analysis. And we're going to have a different analysis if we go by row. So we could look at work, for example, and we look at the differences between these means here, okay, and we get a particular pattern. And then we want to look at relationships and see, well, do we get a different pattern here? All right, and et cetera, et cetera. So in other words, we're going to be breaking down this interaction by looking at the effect of a particular variable. So for example, we could look at concern category, compare the mean for work, relationships, USA, etc. But we can look at it specifically within just one column. So within this column of religiosity. All right. And then we can look at the effect of concern category, but now just within that column. Do you see the way this is going? If we were looking at the rows, that means we would be comparing the different means of religiosity, right? But only for the work category. Similarly, we would then compare the means of religiosity, but only for the relationship category. These are called tests of simple main effects. And I'm going to show you using a picture and hopefully, a graph, and hopefully it'll be a lot more clear. So let's look at that. So first of all, here are the cell means plotted. And so we have the different groups of religiosity, and we've plotted those for the work category. And then the same thing, the different means of religiosity, but for relationships, and then et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All right. Now let's just take this one here first. All right. We see a particular pattern, right? We see that religious and practicing frequently is so much higher than the others. Well, if we were to then compare the pattern, this next group, so for the planet, we started with the planet. Where's my cursor? Here we go. We started with the planet. We see a particular pattern. But then we moved over to global world, and the pattern doesn't change very much. All right. And that's going to be true when you get here, right? If you look at this pattern, it very much resembles the other two. But over here within this grouping, so within the relationship question, we begin to see the pattern change. And then it changes again here. So what this is suggesting is that there could very well be an interaction effect, one that's significant. Now, we ran the ANOVA, and I can tell you, yes, the interaction is significant. So now we want to figure out, well, okay, exactly what is going on. And so the first way we're going to do this is we are going to look at what's called the simple main effect, or just SME, of religion within concern category. Now, whatever variable you put first, so the simple main effect of religion is first, religion, that refers to the means that you're going to compare. So it's telling me I'm going to look at the different means of religion. And then within concern category, well, this second variable tells me how I'm going to focus, what am I going to focus my comparison on, all right? Another way of thinking about it is replace instead of using the word within, replace that with the words only for, all right? So we're going to be comparing the means of religion only for a specific concern category. So if we were to start here with this one, we want to compare the means of religion. I'm just going to name the colors, it's easier. So blue, red, green, and orange within only for the planet. All right. So this would be the simple main effect of religion, because we're comparing the means of religion within planet. That means only for planet. Now you have to ask yourself, what test would be appropriate to make those, to compare these means? Well, we've already established that you can only be in one religious category. All right. So this factor, religion, is between subjects. All right, different people in each group. Well, if you had one variable, because we're only comparing religion, so it's one variable, and there are different people in each group, what test would you run? And if you said a one-way independent ANOVA, congratulations, you're correct. All right, so again, we have four means, different people in each group. We're going to run a one-way independent ANOVA, but just on this data. We're going to ignore the other data, okay? So just on these four means. Then, if that ANOVA is significant, all we know at this point is that at least two means are different from each other, but we don't know which two, and in fact, there could be more means that are different from each other besides two. So when we get a significant one-way independent ANOVA, we're going to have to follow that up with post hoc tests. And again, it's just on this data, all right? And you can choose LSDT, Tukey, Chaffee. Those are very common, all right? And then once you run the post hoc test, you'll know exactly which means are different from which. All right. Now, once you finish that, you move over to this group. Now, here again, you're comparing the means of religion, but only for global world this time. All right. So again, it's going to be a one-way independent ANOVA, because the people who are in each of these religious categories are different people. So a different group of people in this blue group compared to the red, green, and orange. So you run the one-way independent ANOVA, and if that is significant, again, you're going to have to follow it up with post hoc tests to see which mean is different from which. And then you keep doing that. So now you would move over to this group, and you would run another one-way independent ANOVA. And if that ANOVA is significant, follow it up with your post hoc tests. Then you do the same thing here and the same thing here. So because we have 5 different levels down here on the x-axis, 5 levels of concern category, that means you are going to be running 5 one-way independent ANOVAs. One for this grouping, one here, one here, one here, one here. All right? And of course, those are going to have to be followed up with post hoc tests. Now, once you do your post hoc tests, you're going to be able to say, okay, here's what I found for this group. Then compare it. Did you find the same set of differences over here and here? If you did, if there were the exact same differences, let's say for these 3 groups, then there would be no interaction. But because we have this group is changing the pattern, right? Which means they're different from which. The pattern changes here and then again here. That's where your interaction effect is showing up. But you're going to have to still do your one-way independent ANOVAs and post hoc tests to show people conclusively, well, as conclusively as you can with statistics, because we all know that no matter what you find, it's these are only probabilities. But you're going to be able to show people that, in fact, there are differences between the means here that are not the same as over here, etc. All right? Okay, so that would be the simple main effect of religion within concern category. And again, you'd be able to show that the differences between the religious groups really does depend on whether you're looking at the work concern, relationships, USA, global world, or the planet. Now, before I move on to the simple main effect in the other direction, let me just point out something here. Let's pretend that you just had 2 groups of religion, all right? If you only had 2 groups, so within each of the concern categories, you'd only be comparing 2 means, right? Let's say you had religious, practicing frequently, and non-religious, or not religious. If you only had 2 groups, then that wouldn't be a one-way independent ANOVA. That would be an independent t-test. And that's kind of nice because if you run an independent t-test and you see that the 2 means are different, you don't need a post hoc test to tell you which 2 means are different from which. You already know because there are exactly 2 means. So the difference has to be between them. All right, but because we have 3 or more means, here we have 4, then we have to do the ANOVA. It's not a t-test anymore. All right, let's move on to this next category of test of simple main effect. All right, so before we looked at the simple main effect of religion within concern category, this one is going to look at the simple main effect of concern category within religion. All right. So remember how to take this apart. Look at that first variable, simple main effect of concern category. That means that you're going to be comparing the means of the different concern categories. Within religion, remember, replace the word within with only for. So you're going to look at the different means of concern category, but only for specific religions or within specific religions. All right, religious groups. So let me show you how that's going to work. So what we're going to do is we want to compare concern categories. So we know we're going to be comparing the work mean to relationships, USA, global world, and the planet. But we're going to just do it first for religious and practicing frequently. So in other words, we're going to be looking at this mean, the blue mean, versus this blue mean, this one, and this one. All right. So the blue refers to religious and practicing regularly. So you see how we've isolated our comparison? We are comparing the different means of work, relationships, USA, global world, and the planet, but only for religious and practicing regularly. Now we have to figure out what test we're going to run in order to compare those means. Well, remember that everybody answered or contributed a score to the work question or the work category, relationships, USA, global world, and the planet. So that means that this factor is within subjects. And because you have 3 or more means, you're going to have to run a one-way repeated measures ANOVA. All right, so it's a one-way repeated measures ANOVA because it's the same people. Each of these means is made up of the same group of people, and you have 3 or more means. Now, if this one-way repeated ANOVA is significant, all we know is that there are differences somewhere among these means, but we don't know where. So we are going to have to run another post hoc test. But you may recall that when you have a one-way repeated measures ANOVA, the post hoc test is not called 2P, Chaffee, LSDT. It's actually called, at least in SPSS, pairwise comparisons. All right, so you're going to run a pairwise comparisons test to see which means are different from which. And don't worry, because I do have a video up that shows you exactly how to do that. All right, how to get these post hoc tests for the one-way repeated measures ANOVA. All right. Once you have the post hoc tests completed, you'll know exactly which means are different from which. At this point, then, you should move to the red group, right? Now you want to know, now that you know what's going on with the blue, now you want to know, well, what's happening with these red groups, these red means, which is religious and practicing infrequently. So again, you're going to run a one-way repeated measures ANOVA because the same people are tested in each of these red groups. And then if that one-way repeated is significant, you're going to have to run a post hoc test to see, well, which means are different from which. All right? And then you might have guessed it, but now you're going to do the same thing with the green group, which is religious and not practicing. Finally, you're going to have to do the exact same thing with the orange group. All right. So, you know, it may seem like a lot of work to find out which means are different from which and to fully and completely understand your interaction effect. But interaction effects are among the most interesting because it's telling us that if you just look at one variable alone, like religion, you're going to get an incomplete answer. If you look at just concern category alone, you're going to get a different answer. If you look at both of them combined, then you're going to get a more complete story. All right, so it really is something that researchers get excited about, even though it does mean more work. Now, I realize that some of the words here are off the screen, and so I don't know if you've been able to figure it out, but this says the effect of concern category on optimism depends on which level of religiosity we look at. Now, this statement would be true if, in fact, let's say we look at which means are different from which in the orange group. Okay, so we get a pattern, and then we go back and we see, okay, what did we find for the green group? We get a pattern, which means are different from which. We do that for the red group and for the blue group. Now, if the pattern of differences is the same, so if you get the same story with the blue versus the red, the green, and the orange, then that's not where your interaction effect lies. All right, so you may say, for example, the effect of concern category on optimism does not depend on which level of religiosity we look at. All right, so maybe you're not going to get anything there. The patterns are going to be all the same. But remember, that's why we ran the other test of simple main effects. When we looked at the effect religion has within the work category relationships, USA, etc. So we might find pattern changes here. So maybe that's the best way to describe the interaction. If we've got pattern changes here, and it's not that, by the way, it's not that these groups of means are higher than these. All right, you can't look at that. What you have to look at is just look at the means here and say, does the pattern among them change compared to the pattern here? And the answer is yes. And the same thing here. All right. So looking at these two tests of simple main effects, I would say this is the one that we're going to see differences in, where we see pattern changes. It's looking at the simple main effect of religion within concern category And we would conclude, because we will find differences here, that the effect of religion on optimism depends on which concern category we look at. All right. Whereas if we looked at simple main effects this way, where we look at the effect of concern category within specific religions, I don't think we're going to see any differences. I could be wrong, but to me, it looks like we're going to find the same pattern regardless of whether we compare the blue means, the red means, the green means, or the orange means. So, in all likelihood, I think we're going to be concluding here that the effect of concern category on optimism does not depend on which level of religion we look at. But we'll have to see. All right, well, that's it. I hope you found this video useful. Maybe you have to watch it a second time to absorb it all, because that was could be quite complicated for some of you. But if you did find it useful, don't forget to hit that like button. All right, thanks.